but what I'm trying to get at here is that, compost is not soil, right? So soil is mineral elements. So we call them, we talk about sand, silt, and clay. And those are byproducts of erosion, right? So rocks breaking down, it moves around with wind, water, whatever it might be. And so compost is a little bit different. So Molly, click the screen there and let's talk about what compost is. So compost is actually just this dark, crumbly material that is created when microbes are breaking down organic matter. And that organic matter can be leaves, grass, food scraps, basically anything that was alive is considered organic. And again, we're not talking here about like organic food necessarily, but we're just talking about like organic chemistry. So anything that was living with carbon in it, microbes break that down and they create this crumbly material. It contains some recognizable pieces, but it also, it could have little bits of twigs and eggshells. It's not completely decomposed because actually what you want in the process are microbes to complete that decomposition and release those nutrients in that, those once living materials to your soil so that your plants can pick it up. All right, and then why compost? Well, you're all here at the Sustainable Community Summit. So, the main reason we want to encourage folks to compost is for environmental reasons. So it's a very environmentally friendly way to reduce your solid waste. And anyone in the chat know what this whole week is? This whole week, there is a very perfectly themed, national week of something or other that ties in really well. I don't see anyone putting it in there. So I'm going to tell you that is it National like Food Waste Reduction Week. And so this is a perfect talk to discuss, ways that we can reduce food waste. Composting is one where instead of this stuff going to the landfill, which Molly will get into in a little bit here, this is a great way to reduce stuff. Instead of going to the landfill, it goes into your garden, reduces that solid waste. And then number two reason here, improve soil structure. And so for all you gardeners out there, this is going to, it's a couple other health days out here or other national days. So soil health, so that's perfect. Look, it's World Health Day today. So composting helps with soil health. So again, for all you gardeners, that's great. And you use it for fertilizer and mulch. So not only does it increase just the diversity and the water holding capacity, nutrient holding capacity of your soil, it actually provides nutrients to your plants.
Okay, and then as Mark mentioned, the environmental implications of food waste in the landfill. So according to the Environmental Protection Agency, we throw away 37 million tons of food waste annually in the US, and 95% of that ends up in landfills or incinerators. So I did some quick Google searching, and that would be the weight of 6 million adult African bush elephants. Those are the really big ones. Or about 250,000 adult blue whales. And since we're in Tallahassee, we can compare that to the stadium, not that stadium, FSU Stadium. It would fit one blue whale in every seat of the stadium twice. So a lot of food waste that we're putting into our landfills. And then this combines with the anaerobic conditions that create methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that's 25 times worse than CO2. And then landfills make up about 18% of our total methane emissions in the US, and that contributes to climate change. So every little thing that we can do to try to help prevent that just helps in the long run. And so compost added to the soil is going to increase your soil organic matter content. And so you can think of that as like the glue that's going to hold together the sand, silt, and clay in the soil. And then that is going to improve the soil structure, and that improves the ability to hold the water, nutrients, and the air. And it's the microorganisms in the organic matter that are actually converting those organic residues into forms that the plants can use through their roots. So it's really important to get those organic nutrients that say was in an apple into an organic form that can actually be taken up by the roots. And so by doing this decomposition process, that's how you can get there. And so another awesome thing about compost is it's going to increase the soil biological diversity. So in 10 square feet of healthy soil, you could have all of these different types of microorganisms. And so if you just take 1 teaspoon of soil that's healthy, it would have more species in it than the people on Earth. So it's pretty amazing how much life is in, you can't see it, a lot of it's microscopic, but it's going on in a healthy soil environment. It also improves the soil fertility. So soil fertility is really the ability of soil to hold on to nutrients. And so compost is going to help increase what's called the cation exchange capacity. And so if you have a real sandy soil, so especially if you're on more the south side of Tallahassee, you're going to have these giant soil particles. And so by adding compost to that, you're going to be able to retain a lot more nutrients in your soil, which is great if you're trying to do a vegetable garden. And then with clay, there's a lot of micropores in clay. Well, compost can actually do kind of the opposite. It can add organic matter that's going to help to have better drainage in your really clayey soil. So it's a win-win, no matter your soil type. And so what is the key to composting? It is all about making those microbes happy. So what we're really doing is we're feeding microorganism populations. And these populations really depend on the type of food and the proportion of carbon and nitrogen in their food. And we call this the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if you're familiar with composting at all, you might have heard of this ratio. And for a hot composting process, we are trying to get to about 20 to 30 to 1. So that's more carbon than nitrogen. And how you do this, you want to take the 4 ingredients that really, it's 3 ingredients that are feeding the microorganism. So they need food, they need air, and they need water. And so the carbon is oxidized as a source of energy, which allows the microbes to keep eating. And then this oxidation process heats up the pile, and nitrogen builds protein in their bodies that help them grow and reproduce. So it keeps the process going. And so when we say carbon and nitrogen, this is really referring to like brown materials. So those materials that are a lot more dead, and then the green materials. So just less dead. You can kind of think of it that way. And so, if you're thinking maybe a 25 to 1 ratio, it's the combination of both of these ingredients that are going to get you there. So some things you can use, like wood chips, from tree canopy clearing, when they clear the power lines, that's an excellent brown source for your compost. Fallen leaves, if you have a lot of oak trees in your yard, a lot of leaves falling, you can put those into your compost. Small branches and twigs, the more surface area, the better. It's going to help it break down faster. And then shredded paper waste and cardboard. Trying to stay away from those real, waxy type materials, and especially in a home compost, it's going to be a lot harder for those kind of materials to break down if you don't get hot enough. So, small surface area, and the more broken down, the better. And then the greens, so that's your vegetable and fruit scraps. Eggshells, they also import calcium. Coffee grounds, they have a lot of nitrogen. Young herbaceous plants, grass clippings, and then even farm animal manure. But of course, you want to be careful to make sure that your compost is getting hot enough to kill any potential pathogens if you're using farm animal manure. So here is just a few materials and their nitrogen and carbon contents. So these are the ratios. So you can see, the more green materials, the nitrogen, have these lower ratios, and then those with the higher ratios, so more carbon, that's going to be like your leaves, your straw, your wood chips, and we consider those a carbon source for your compost. So the idea, it sounds like Mark said, we get real sciencey and get into the weeds on this, but the big thing that you're doing is you're basically just making layers of your browns and your greens. You're going to have water, you want to have air. We'll talk about that in a second. But at first, it's really just making basically a compost lasagna. So sorry to ruin your dinner tonight to think about that way. But if you're making layers, you're going to get roughly to your carbon nitrogen ratio of about 25 to 1. And then so leaves and wood chips, they're going to provide some aeration as well. And then if you're real heavy on a carbon rich materials, you do want to make sure that you add plenty of water, especially, if we're in these kind of dry streaks in our weather. So water is really important because the microorganisms need that to do their processes. And Mark, you're going to take it away here.
Sure. So the size of your compost pile is, is really important. And this is where, we're going to be focusing tonight on hot composting. So this is where we're using we want our piles, we're creating the environment to get these microbes really working, and they're going to get to very high temperatures. Molly and I also do a vermicomposting type of program where we use worms. And in that case, you don't want a lot of heat. So to get your pile up to the right temperature, which I think Molly's going to get into a little bit more in a little bit, you want to make sure you have a good bulk of material there to get it up to those proper temperatures. And so ideally your compost pile or area will be at least 1 cubic yard in size. So 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. A nice pallet box is a good kind of thing to think of. That's about a cubic yard, a little bit bigger maybe. So even larger compost piles are even going to be more effective at really getting that heat up, and those microbes just really thriving. The other thing that they're going to need to make sure that the microbes are happy again, that's the key, is plenty of water. So rainwater is ideal, but you will want it near a water source, or you will want to water your compost pile if we go through a dry spell. One thing I would recommend, so I think the Tessa and Tobias got some of those type of earth box machines there. I think you see on the lower right. So one thing you can do there, because they have a lid, you may want to go in there. You can either leave the lid open, or you can just water it every now and again to make sure it's staying moist. I think Donna at Native Nurseries had a really great idea. She takes her when she's taking her bin out to her compost bin from the house out to the compost bin in the yard, she fills it up with water and kind of like pours it all in there to make sure she gets a little bit of food in there and also water. Another thing you can do if you have an open pile is you can make a concavity right in the pile to catch that water. And remember that you can compost in the shade. We talked about temperature, and temperature is very important, but it's actually not the sun that heats up the pile, it's the microbes. So in the dead of winter, when we're down below 32 degrees, your compost pile will be steaming. You can see that's Herman at Turkey Hill there on the top left. That's a cold day. It's really fun to see ice and frost over the yard, but your compost piles are nice and warm and steamy, if you're into that kind of thing.
And then, compost temperature, as Mark mentioned, so a freshly built pile that's at least 3 by 3 by 3 feet is going to start heating up rapidly. So it's going to take about a couple days to get there. But if you have all the right ingredients and you have enough bulk, then hopefully you can get that temperature up to around 131 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the temperature that you're really aiming for. But to get it to be able to destroy a lot of the weed seeds and different plant pathogens, you really want to try to get up to 140 degrees. So this can be pretty hard, pretty challenging sometimes, and really in smaller home compost situations. So just kind of keep in mind, we'll talk about in a second, but trying to keep some of those weed seeds, out of your compost. And especially, let's say you're recycling your tomatoes from your garden, at the midsummer area, then you definitely want to keep those out of your compost, because those pathogens could just thrive, not get killed because you're not getting it hot enough. And then if you try to use your compost in your garden, you might just be putting that same pathogen back in. So those are just some things to keep in mind, and you have to make sure that you don't, have problems later on. And then just real quick, the USDA's National Organic Program is actually how they specify the organic farms, and how they have to manage their compost piles. And these temperatures have to get up to these temperatures for a certain amount of days, and they have to keep turning them, regularly. So they take it real seriously in order to kill any potential pathogens. So you can think of it that way, to make sure that you're safe with your composting. And this is a compost thermometer. So it's a long stemmed, compost thermometer. It has a long probe, and you stick it into the middle of your pile, and then hopefully you'll see that temperature, going upward. And so this was a picture we took at one of our in-person composts pre-pandemic, and you'll see there we got up to almost 140 degrees. So we were pretty close to where we can really start killing all those weed seeds and pathogens. But you can find them at a lot of different, landscape supply stores, and they're real handy when you're really trying to get into making sure your compost is composting correctly. Okay, aerobic bacteria. So I think we all know, we hear about having to turn a compost pile. And the real important thing with this is you're trying to have that aerobic bacteria population to thrive. So here's just some long scientific names of some of the good guys that you're looking for in your compost. And so when oxygen levels drop, so if it's too wet or you're not turning your compost pile, then these aerobic bacteria are going to begin to die, and decomposition can actually slow by up to 90%. And that is when these other types of bacteria will come in, so the anaerobic bacteria, and they'll take over and they produce organic acids. That's when you're going to get your neighbors upset with you because everything's going to start smelling bad. And also it can contain unavailable nitrogen, and it could be toxic to your plants if you try to use that compost. And they produce the hydrogen sulfide. Ooh, smelly, rotten eggs. So this is where it is important to make sure that you're turning your compost. That's really when smells are going to persist if you don't turn your compost. A little bit more into the weeds. So the different populations, this is kind of as your compost pile is heating up, it's really different species of bacteria that are working. So you got the psychrophilic work at the lowest temperature range, so about 55 to 70 degrees. And then the next level is the mesophilic. They work at about 70 to 100 degrees. And then the thermophilic, so we call hot composting a thermophilic process, because these are the bacteria that you're trying to get towards. So they operate at about 113 to 160 degrees. And then, as your compost pile heats up and then starts to decline, you will get the mesophilic bacteria becoming more of the dominant form of bacteria in your compost pile. And then we also have the actinomycetes and the fungi. So these guys help to break down some of those more resistant materials. So like your lignins and your celluloses and your starches. So it's all kinds of different microorganisms going on in this process. And then so a freshly built pile of both carbon and nitrogen ingredients, you're going to have it heat up over those 1 or 2 days. And then, depending on the size and what you have in it, if you have a compost thermometer, you will be able to start seeing that it plateaus to about 80 to 100 degrees. And this is your cue to turn your pile. So that's how you get that oxygen in there, and you're able to get some of that stuff on the edges into the middle. And that's how you can get that temperature back going up again. And so you keep doing that until your compost pile has basically plateaued in temperature. And that's when you'll start to see, you won't be able to see the pieces of food you put in there, but you'll actually start seeing more of a look of soil, and it'll be more earthy in smell. Mark?
Okay, so pH. pH, for all you gardeners out there, you know that it's important to monitor the pH of your soil for good plant growth. And your optimum compost pH is about 6 to 7.5. So that works out great because that's really kind of most plants are right around 6 to 7 is where they want to be. But it's important to remember that and there was a question about using coffee grinds, and some people have mentioned, because of the acidity, really what happens here is you are putting together this pile. The microbes are doing all sorts of chemical reactions in there. So actually, as they're digesting that organic material, they're releasing acids into the soil matrix or the compost matrix there and dropping that pH. You can go too far and get too much acidity. And if that happens again, you get towards that anaerobic conditions. And again, that's where the stinky stuff where, you don't want to get there. So that is why it's, again, really important to be continuously aerating because you want to always be bringing in air, keeping things aerobic. And the great thing about compost is, say it's not perfect, or say you're adding it to soil that is, you've been tinkering with pH. Another soil benefit of compost is that it acts as a great buffer. So it tends to not let the soil drastically change too quickly with, maybe, changes in the environment. So it tends to stabilize the soil pH overall in general. But if you do it right, you don't really necessarily need to worry too much about the pH. Again, precautions. Molly mentioned this a little bit. Weeds that have gone to seed and disease plants, You want to try to avoid those, especially if you are in a smaller type system that may not get up to that 140 degrees. Again, because it may not get hot enough to kill those pathogens, kill those weed seeds. And if you're putting that stuff back in your, say, raised bed garden, you're going to be reintroducing those seeds and diseases right back into your bed. You also want to avoid meats, bones, oils, fats, cheeses. These are all the types of things that are going to attract those animals. And I think my favorite graphic ever that Molly has found is our raccoon. That's a very cool raccoon there, Molly. Good job. And not only do these things attract animals, but they can create some of those foul odors that you don't want, right? For yourself, your neighbors, anything like that. It's also important to note, we think of manures as being a really great source of, organic matter and, fertilization, mulch for your vegetable gardens and gardens in general. But just know that any kind of carnivore you want to avoid. So if you think about the manures that we typically use, they're from omnivores or vegetarians, right? So the reason we want to avoid carnivore waste is they share a lot of the same parasites and diseases as we do. So we want to keep all that stuff out of the compost. The best thing to do with that is to collect it in a bag and put it in the household hazardous waste, or just household garbage. Okay, as far as, we've really gone into the nuts and bolts of what you're going to put in your pile. You're going to manage it by watering it, keeping it moist, kind of monitoring the temperature if you really want to get nerdy with it. So the thing is, what are you going to put this stuff in? And so what are your options? And I know the county, again, the earth machine in the center, I think they were just providing these, and I think they sold out in like no time. Some of these ready-made compost bins, they can be a little bit pricey, especially like if you look at the one on the left, it looks, really fancy. But you see the option all the way on the right. I think that was in Molly's backyard. That's just a simple little, little plastic kind of thin fence-like material that just kind of binds on itself. That's pretty inexpensive. So there are ready-made bins. These are nice if space is an issue. The nice thing about that earth machine with the lid is you can kind of guarantee that you're not going to have animal pests getting in there, especially maybe if you're in a more urban setting and you have feral cats or things like that you might be concerned about. But just remember, with those, you do want to make sure you open it and water it every now and again. In addition to the ready-made compost bins, these are really handy. So if you want to save your shoulders sometimes, because now composting is a great workout, right? So not only is it good for the environment, but flipping those piles over and over again is really great CrossFit training. But if you want to get out of that, you can buy these. They're a little bit more expensive, but these are tumblers. And so this gets the mixing part out of the way for you, right? You're going to load up your browns, your greens, and every now and again, you're just going to give it a little flip. And that's going to help you, again, just make the turning process a whole lot easier. Or you can go homemade fashion, right? This is what I have in my backyard. These are just homemade, these are just pallets that have been put together. Ideally what you'll have is kind of 3 bins, 3 to 4 bins maybe. So you'll have one that you'll be actively filling, one that you can turn into, and usually you're going to have to turn it at least one more time, maybe another, before it's really ready to go out into the garden. And an important thing to remember about composting is you need to eventually let it finish, right? So I think a lot of comments I've had from, homeowners that have some of these earth machine type bins is that they don't ever know when to collect it because there's still food in there, right? So you do need to, at some point, stop adding fresh material so the microbes can kind of munch on it. And that's why flipping, what I would suggest if you have one of those earth bins is you're going to kind of fill it up. You can kind of lift that thing up, move it over, and then you can kind of flip that pile right back into it to kind of get that mixing going on. But you got to remember, if you just keep, you can't just keep adding stuff or that process will never end. Open compost piles, maybe not work in the city, but this is for in the back 40, no partitions, this is just a big pile of materials. And so this is great for large volumes of composting. This is where you're going to want to use a tractor. So our buddy Cindyata, who is actually one of the in-person events this weekend, I don't know if they're full quite yet, Tobias will let us know, but he's going to show you, Sundiata is going to show you his compost community setup. And I believe he did get a new tractor lately. So I'm pretty jealous of Sundiata's new tractor. All right, so how do we go about building the pile? Remember, we're just creating a happy environment for microbes to break down rotten old food, right? So this is kind of how we go about it. You want to make a nice bed of leaves. So you're going to start with some of those browns, and then you're just going to start making your lasagna, right? So we got browns. We threw some coffee over the leaves there. We put a bunch of whole scraps on there. We put a little bit more coffee on the top, and we covered it with more leaves. And my general kind of, the general kind of way you tell that you've put enough in your lasagna layer is you take your shovel and you kind of poke around, or your pitchfork, you kind of poke around at the layer you're working on. And if you easily move things around and see the pile below, you haven't added enough. So throw a little bit more on there before you start putting the next layer on. Hopefully you guys understand that. Again, here we're getting close to the top. So we've added our fourth little pallet to keep the stuff from falling out. And you can see we're just building and building and building this pallet up to the top with our lasagna. There we threw a little eggs on top, like a little bonus cherry on top thing. We put some eggs in there.
And then this really gives you it gives you the idea of that it really takes a lot of materials in order to get the temperature really high enough to get up to 140 degrees. So that's why it can be sometimes a challenge to be composting on a home scale, just because you might not necessarily get up to 140 degrees if you don't have that bulk.
Yeah, because remember, you're trying to get up to that at least 1 cubic foot area of material, bulk material for those microbes to do their thing.
There it is.
Okay, here it is, all at the end. We tie it all up. This one even got a little bit painted, made it look fancy. And you might be asking yourself at the end, well, I'm only going to talk about finished compost here in a moment, but this pile, say we take this all the way to the very top of the pallet square there. By the time we flip it, and by the time this pile is done, it's decomposed by about 2/3. So you only, this right here, that whole pallet full is maybe about a yard of soil, which is about what fills a 4x8 bed. But remember, you're going to have this bulk, but then those microbes are going to break it down. They're going to concentrate nutrients, and you're only going to have about 1/3 of what you started with. So it's going to take 3 of these just to get enough soil for 1 4x8 bed. And I'm just looking at we'll try to give some people some tips for those earth machines on how to get up to that temperature. So troubleshooting here, if it smells bad, something's wrong, right? Compost, if it's done correctly, does not smell. I know that was someone's comment earlier. They're worried about the smell. I even used, fish waste for a while, and that's a little bit smelly, especially when you're, dumping it in. But once the pile is put together, there shouldn't be a very stinky smell around. And so some of the causes of odor would be too much nitrogen. So you put too many green materials in there. So say too much food scraps, too many fish guts. And that's where you want to then, to clear that up, you want to add some more brown materials, leaves, wood chips, whatever it might be. Excess moisture will cause the pile to go anaerobic, and that's where you're going to get those funky smells. So again, you want to try to somehow, maybe you need to cover it if we're getting a lot of rain. Maybe you just need to make sure that you add enough kind of browns to the bottom to get a little bit of drainage. And again, if it smells because of it's gone anaerobic, turning the pile, flipping the pile will add that oxygen to the pile. If the pile is too cold, so basically you're finding that it's not heating up, the stuff's not breaking down very quickly. Oftentimes what's going on here is not enough nitrogen material. So imagine just if you piled a bunch of leaves in there, not much is going to happen. So you might need to add some more green materials. Again, it could be a lack of oxygen. So in that case, again, turn the pile. Lack of moisture can also cause things to not, those microbes are not happy. So they're just not functioning. So, give it a little bit of water. But you got to be careful. It's Goldilocks, right? You don't want too much water. You don't want too little water. So just make sure that you shouldn't be able to, I was going to say, you shouldn't be, don't necessarily going to want to get into the practice. Maybe you have gloves on of like grabbing a big handful of compost out of the middle of the pile, but when you squeeze it, it should not have, water kind of dripping off of it. Now, if you have animal or insect pests, that is where you might have put, maybe there's something going on where they're attracted to something in the pile, maybe some fatty stuff or, meat type products. So just make sure you keep that kind of stuff out of your pile.
Yeah, and I'll say about the earth machine bins, one nice thing is if once you're filling it up, you can open up that panel and then take from above and put it back on the top, and that can help you kind of mix those materials. And then after a while, that will be able to help heat up the pile, and then you can start harvesting from the bottom. So one thing I know some people do is just you can keep adding to the top of your earth machine, but then because you've been turning it and mixing it for a while, you'll have pretty much finished compost coming out of the bottom. So one nice thing about them is they really do help keep your materials going upwards. That's going to help kind of give it that bulkiness. And then also, as long as you're making sure that you're adding water to your earth machine, then you should be able to get kind of that more of a tumble effect if you keep taking from the bottom and putting it back on top. So that'd be kind of my advice to keep it going for an earth machine.
And I'll add with those earth machines, a lot of time it is the lack of moisture because of that lid. Again, so you can take the lid off if you'd like and just let rainwater get in there. And, a common complaint we get are fire ants in compost piles. And again, that's usually because it's not wet enough. If, a really moist environment that's going to be ideal for composting is typically not very conducive to fire ants. So that's, one way to keep the fire ants out of there too.
Okay, and so I'm just going to cover a couple alternative composting methods. So sheet composting, so this is just basically top dressing with carbon-rich materials on the soil surface. And this is a really great way to have basically a real slow release decomposition process. It's going to add organic matter to your soil. And one of the best benefits is getting out those weeds. So if you have a landscape bed or a garden and you put mulch on there, and that's organic, it's going to break down over time, but it's also going to help prevent all those weeds from growing, especially as we get into these hotter months. Some disadvantages, it is going to be a slow rate of decomposition if your goal is to get a lot of organic matter in that area. But of course, that can also be an advantage when you're trying to smother out weeds. And then it's not, these materials, if there were weed seeds in there or any diseases, they won't necessarily be killed just because it's not getting that thermophilic process. A couple other methods. So we got trench composting. So this is where you can dig like an 8-inch deep garden area. You fill it up with kitchen scraps and then you backfill with the soil. And so it's a longer process. It's going to take a few months, but slowly those materials are going to be decomposing. Less labor intensive, and can compost nitrogen rich materials that can help detract pests by covering it up. And the Native Americans taught pilgrims this method by fertilizing corn crops with buried fish scraps. And so some of the advantages here, disadvantages, you're going to have a slower rate of decomposition. If you have a dog, they might dig it up, and you're not necessarily going to destroy the diseases and weed seeds, because you're not introducing that air and getting things all moving around. But this can be a great method if, say, you have a raised bed that you could do this trench composting method into, and then over time you're going to be adding a lot of those nutrient-rich materials that will make good compost, down the line. Cold bin composting. So this is where you fill your bin with a good layer of carbon. So let's say you have like mulch, and then you start adding your nitrogen materials, and then you cover it with carbon as you go. So if you're more of a don't want to get out there and turn it real often, you can still at least keep your food waste out of the landfill by doing a cold bin composting method. Again, though, it's going to take a really long time. You're not necessarily going to be killing any of the weed seeds or plant diseases, but after enough time and maybe occasional turning, then you should be able to get a little bit of usable compost out of this this cold bin composting system.
And that's a good way to actually, sometimes those earth machines, they're perfect for this cold bin composting, right? So if you're just, say you're just maybe 2 folks in a house or just single in a house, right? And you don't create enough vegetable waste. We're going to talk about scaling up here in a little bit, but this is where you can at least use the earth machine. Again, if you don't have those amount of greens to get the right bulk, you can at least use this almost like a cold bin composting system, where at least food waste, right, won't be going to the landfill, right? It's going to be somehow getting munched on by microbes. Maybe you don't use the compost for a vegetable garden, but it'd be something that you could add the compost around your landscape plants or something like that.
Okay, unfinished compost. So you really only want to kind of, just as Mark said, you want to incorporate finished compost into your soil. And unfinished compost that's really high in carbon, if you add that and you're trying to rely on that, say for your vegetable garden, then that is going to be the microorganisms are going to be searching for that nitrogen to continue the decomposition process, and then they're going to rob nitrogen from your soil. So I remember this was a problem if you were trying to put a raised bed together and you use nothing but mulch. If all of the seeds that are trying to come up are going to be struggling to have nutrients, and you're not going to have a very healthy garden. So you do want to make sure that you don't have a really heavy in carbon compost that's just going to be trying to steal the nitrogen from your soil, and then the plants can't access it. Also, unfinished compost high in nitrogen. It's going to give off excess nitrogen as ammonia gas, and you're going to lose that valuable nitrogen to the atmosphere, and you will have a very stinky pile. So, these are the two extremes that you want to avoid when you're making your compost. Finished compost will have an organic matter content of about 50%, and then carbon nitrogen ratio ideally at about 20:1, or 25:1, and 30:1 is okay too. A near neutral pH, Mark talked about, the different stages it'll go through, but once it's finished, it gets back to about neutral, and that's about 7. And it's going to be teeming with beneficial microorganisms. So these microbes are going to continue to slowly convert nutrients in the compost and in your soil into forms that plants can use. So taking that organic nitrogen, turning it into nitrate and ammonium, and then for phosphorus, organic phosphorus to soluble phosphate. So real important to grow healthy plants. So it's ready to use when it's dark brown, crumbly, it doesn't smell bad, it looks just more like soil. And then you can mix your finished compost into the upper layer of your soil. If you have a vegetable garden, it's great to top your soil with compost. And if you have a landscape bed, you can also help fertilize your plants that way and help to smother weeds. So like I said in the beginning, it's great for all types of soil. It helps to help retain moisture in sandy soil, and in clay, it helps to increase the drainage, and you're adding that microorganism population that really gets more competition and more life in your soil. Is just going to give you more resilience, against different types of insects and diseases. Mark?
All right, so for sourcing carbon materials, so let's say we're going to talk a little bit about going big here, but at the house from the kitchen, you have some amount of nitrogen materials just ready to go, right? And again, I was getting ready to answer Barb here, but coffee grinds are a good one. Your tea bags, your eggs, you're chopping up and you're getting rid of the little bits and pieces of carrots and onions and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff can be your nitrogen source. Sometimes sourcing carbon materials can be trickier. So a couple of ways you can get access to these materials would be to go to the Leon County Solid Waste Facility over at the Appalachia Regional Park. Here you can actually pick up free wood chips, and they have 2 different piles that you can pull from. It's a coarse pile and a fines pile. The fine pile looks like compost, and we've had a lot of people think it's compost and try to use that material as compost. But like Molly said, it's mostly just carbon-rich materials that end up just stealing any little bit of nitrogen from whatever might be in the area that you mix it in with. So just remember that those would be great for a carbon input for a compost pile, but not to grow plants in. The city of Tallahassee will actually deliver wood chips from their tree clearing operations. And so, they're going up and down, clearing power lines of trees. They chip all that stuff up, and you can actually get it dropped off. I would recommend, kind of letting that stuff sit there for a little bit. You can use it for composting, especially after it sits a little bit, because it's really going to be really, really high in carbon. So you want some of that to kind of mellow out a little bit, or you can use it directly as a mulch in the landscape. And there's a link here that you'll have where you can, check this out. And then a really great way, and the way I like to do it, is to go, some folks bag up their leaves, right? That's just, nutrients falling from the sky. They bag them up, they put them out on the street for you and I, okay? So for you composters, you can go out there, drive around, and you can put these things in your back of your truck, your bike carriage, whatever you got. You do want to make sure that, typically what I'm looking for are lots of oak trees. I don't really want a lot of pine needles. They just tend to be very acidic over time. You want to make sure that you don't see often a lot of, this yard just sprayed type of signs, maybe in that yard that you're pulling from, because you might be pulling in some various pesticides. And also, I mean, you will find treats in here like, dog poop and dog toys and random trash, but this can be a really good way to get easy access to carbon materials. And now if you want to go bigger, right? So say you've mastered compost in the backyard and you really want to go big and make a whole lot because you really want to get into vegetable gardening. You don't want to have to buy, mixed soil, and you don't want to, you don't like seeing all this food products go to waste, right? So this is where you can put in some effort and go a little bit bigger. So we already talked about the leaves. Here is my truck. This is about a half a week's collections. Right now, I got actually someone else is doing the collections. I kind of took a break when COVID hit, but someone else has taken over the collection process here. And I've worked with various restaurants in figuring out a way to get their food scraps, their coffee grinds, their eggshells. Again, the carbon materials kind of come from all over. You can see Molly working really hard down here in the lower left. That was when she was working for Turkey Hill Farm. And Turkey Hill Farm has an amazing fish and chips operation where they use a lot of food or fish waste from Southern Seafood. So if you eat at Southern Seafood or get fish from Southern Seafood, know that they're doing a great job in being responsible stewards of the waste. And let's see, what's next, Miles? That's what we got. Again, working with these local restaurants, trying to find ways to make it easy for them, right? So you can see on the left, this is edible arrangements. There's kind of a schedule that we have in their walk-in cooler where all of the fruit that they can't use, some of it doesn't look all that bad, but it's not primo quality that they can, give to their customers, right? So they got to throw it away. And so they put in these buckets. I come on, twice a week and we'll take the full buckets, leave them empty buckets, and they love it. They don't have to take all that stuff out and, real heavy out to the dumpster. The second from the left. Okay, well, second from the left, that was at Axios, the salt bar and juice bar. So their juicy machine right there. They set it up so that all the material went right into the trash can, and I just showed up, smiled, picked it up and left. And then over on the right, that's Red Eye Coffee, and I'm not sure if they're still getting collected. I'll have to check on that, but Red Eye Coffee was saving all of their coffee debris, and me and a couple other people would go there and pick up the bins in the back of the Red Eye Coffee shop. Here's just some more examples. Jenny's Lunchbox, or now it's just called The Lunchbox, I guess. They were taking care of this. You see edible arrangements again in the middle. There's her bucket kind of right by her workstation. And on the right, that's Uptown Cafe. Uptown also saved me their coffee, their eggshells, and some other random things I would get from them time to time. And the main thing is that when you start with this, you have to be very consistent, right? Because these restaurants cannot keep this stuff sitting around for too long. If you don't show up when you say you are, they will stop collecting it because it's going to get gross. Restaurants can't have, stuff sitting out like that. So you have to be consistent and you have to keep them happy. So I love this photo. One day I went around and said, hey, how much do you guys like composting? And look at all those beautiful smiles. They all really enjoyed it. Then none of them know my name. They just know me as Compost Guy. But we have a good time and I enjoy seeing them all. And I kind of miss them because it's been a little while since I've picked up from them.
Yeah, these are all pre-pandemic pictures. Yeah, and Mark already mentioned it, but just another example of large scale composting, or more medium scale composting anyway. So this is Herman Hawley at Turkey Hill Farm, and he takes the chips from the clearing of the canopy when they do the power lines, and then the fish waste from Southern Seafood, and he'll use his tractor, and he'll make about a few different piles that are a bit smaller, using a 1 cubic yard wood chips to 32 gallons of fish waste. And then he turns those piles by putting them all together into one bulk pile, working upward up a slight slope, so that if any unfinished materials was to go downward in the rain, then it wouldn't affect the finished pile. And so this way he can get that temperature really high, definitely above 140 degrees, can kill any diseases, any weed seeds. And this is what they use to fertilize all of the different fruits and vegetables that they grow on their farm. So you can see it's a lot of work, and you would never see an organic farm giving away their compost, because they need every little bit of it. As Mark mentioned before, it really shrinks, down when it's starting to decompose, and it really is a black gold. It's definitely invaluable. Okay, that is all that we have. It might be some questions. That's our contact emails. If you don't get your question answered, if you have a question you can think of, definitely feel free to contact us. And we will give Leon County our slides so that you guys can look back at these. If you missed something, maybe it'll help think about other questions that you can email us in the future.
Yeah, and be on the lookout too. As I just mentioned to Barb, the use of, one thing you might be considering is, well, I don't make enough of this material. What do I do then? And so that cold bin composting, and I know someone wants to kind of see that slide again. Again, you'll get these slides. But vermicomposting, which Molly and I do presentations on, composting with worms. That's another really that's even more practical for 1 or 2 people in the house, not creating very much debris. It doesn't smell. It may seem weird that you have like pet worms, or they're basically livestock, but they again, they don't smell. They're pretty easy to take care of, and they do an amazing job of turning your little bits of food scrap into black gold. And Barb, buy worms. The best local place to get worms is from, oh, Molly, help me out. Cynthia from
Ladybird Organics.
Ladybird Organics. Yeah, she has the organic wine, the organic grape orchard over in Monticello area, and she sells composting worms.
Yep, you can look at our website. You just type in Ladybird Organics, and she'll come up, and give her a call, and you can pick up like a quart of worms. I think it's for $25. And you'll have bedding and worms in there, and the worms will be kind of all at the bottom, but they're excellent worms. So I definitely suggest that.
She's got good worms.
Great worms. Do we have any other questions, Tobias?
Yeah, cool, awesome. I just wanted to remind all the attendees here that Mark and Molly have graciously given us another 30 minutes. And it looks like we do have that many questions. So feel free to stick around as some of these questions get answered. Again, thank you both for the presentation. I also want to fit in a few quick notes kind of about what our office has available at the moment, some of the initiatives that Mark mentioned. So as Mark mentioned, we did do an initial compost bin wholesale. Those went away really quickly, but because of how much interest there is, it's something we plan on continuing to do. So on our website, growinggreen.org/composting, you'll see some information about that. Put yourself on a wait list, and we'll follow up with some of that information once we have it. For you guys that are itching to start composting right now and can't wait, we also have a compost drop-off site available, as Mark mentioned, at the Leon County Solid Waste Facility out at 7550 Appalachia Parkway. Unfortunately, right now you can't get compost there. In the future, if it gets enough drop-off usage, we want to consider models for doing that. But for now, you can drop off your compost. You're reducing food waste and help there. Also, a quick reminder for anybody that's thinking, I don't have the space or time at home to do this. composting is not something you just have to do at home. We here in our office have a kitchen compost bin that originally we just had a dedicated staff member taking that back to their house. So if you want some of that liquid gold for yourself, feel free to take advantage of your coworkers by just putting that kitchen composter in the office and then taking all those food scraps home and reaping the benefits. Otherwise, if you guys have space in the back like we do, we have 2 of the Earth Machine compost bins back there, and we just weekly move all of our kitchen scraps back there, and then every couple months, have a whole heaping pile of good compost to use. Cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, Tobias. So at your workplace, if you're not collecting enough, if you're not generating enough yourself, when I worked for Leon County's Public Works and then the Growth Management Department, everyone's got a coffee machine somewhere, right? And so I just took one of those empty, Folgers type bins and put compost on it, and they knew to put their filters, their coffee in there, and then every day, every couple of days, I would take it out and take it home.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, well, with that, we have a bunch of questions here, so I'll just kind of go through these in no particular order, and we'll see, how many we can get answered. Some of these might be a little redundant, but we'll go through it. So let's start off with.
And if folks have to take off, thank you for joining us, but feel free to listen to all the questions here. Sorry, Tobias.
All good. Yep. Okay, so Brenda asks, can I use compost in my houseplants, or will it stink up the house and/or attract bugs?
I will say that's probably not a good idea, because again, remember Molly told you that it's teeming with microbes, right? So there's a chance that there could be some, there could be the little fungus gnats, springtails, things that people often don't like in their house. So I would tend to want to keep composted, compost materials, outside would be my recommendation. Molly's like, I don't care.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if you definitely want to make sure it is definitely finished. Maybe sometimes the commercial compost that you buy in bulk might be a little more homogeneous in that way. But yeah,
I would say even, for all your house plants, typically you want to use a really nice type of potting mix, yes, right? From, right. Kind of one of these blended mixes, which is, it's a lot of organic material, but it's used. Compost again tends to it's teeming with microbes. So some folks don't want those microbes. Yeah.
All right, here's a neat one from Elijah. Can a plant be planted in pure compost without adding any soil?
Great question, Elijah. That's not my son, I don't think, is it? I don't think he's watching. Molly, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it can. So you can plant straight into just compost. In general, it might dry out a little bit quicker. And then of course it is going to be decomposing over time. So you're going to want to add, more materials. Probably the best thing to do is have more of a compost soil mix. So although you could plant just into compost, sometimes it'll help, especially with slowing down the decomposition and holding in some moisture if you have more of a sand, silt, clay, soil mixed with the compost. But sure, it can be done. I've definitely had raised beds that I've just filled up with compost before and grew great plants.
And to Molly's point there, what it'll help with is, remember straight compost is just organic matter, and it's going to continue to decompose and decompose. If you mix it with soil that has those mineral particles of sand, silt, and clay, that stuff doesn't go anywhere, right? It kind of stays put. So you'll have less kind of settling in your beds, but it works great. It'll work great too. So depends on how much you got, Elijah.
Cool, awesome, guys. A bunch of questions here about coffee grounds. So we have somebody asking, do used coffee grounds acidify the compost? Is it not recommended to use coffee grounds in the compost? And if so, any reason not to?
You can use coffee grounds. So most of the acidity when you make coffee actually does go into your cup of coffee. And so use coffee grounds. It's really going to be the filter and the coffee itself, just high in nitrogen. And it's a great material to put into a compost. Yeah, no problems there.
Yeah, people do get confused because, coffee grinds are brown, right? They think they might be a brown product for your compost bin, but remember, it's more about, how dead it is. So those coffee beans are not so dead. And so it's actually a high nitrogen material. Yeah. It's great.
Cool. And a couple similar questions here about eggs. So can you guys explain, yeah, I guess, are eggs good to compost? If so, is there a specific thing people should be doing with them?
Yeah, so you can compost eggs. If you want to be sure to keep out any critters, you'd probably be recommended to wash out those eggshells first. And then the other thing to do is to crush them is ideal. Mark's shaking his head. It's if you're strictly speaking trying to keep out critters and that kind of thing, then it is better to wash them out. I know when Mark got them from the restaurants, he definitely didn't wash out those eggs, but he'd put it in they'd be in a big bucket, and then he would crush all of those eggshells because they do, the more surface area, the faster they're going to decompose. And so it would be beneficial, especially if you have a bulk amount, to crush the eggshells.
Yeah, crush and probably not put it right at the top, right? You'd want to make sure that there's a good layer, right? That always that top layer of your compost bin, of your lasagna, should be a nice thick layer of leaves to make sure that, it's not easy for things to get in there and the smells don't kind of emanate very easily. But like Molly said, I crushed them. We actually looked up, we couldn't find a good carbon to nitrogen ratio of eggs, but they are very rich in calcium. And that can be really important for your plant growth, especially things like tomatoes and whatnot.
And we always make the joke when we do our vermicompost workshops of like city worms versus country worms. And so, what kind of compost pile do you want to have? So it's a city compost
Country
pile
worms.
or a country compost pile, kind of depending on the little things that you'll do to help keep your pile less stinky.
I thought you were going to tell them the saying that you keep your mouth closed and, if something lands on your lips, you don't lick it off, right? That's the other trick when you're messing with compost.
There you go. We're getting all the tidbits. Awesome. So a couple
from experience, Tobias.
Okay, so we got a couple more questions focused on acidity. So people are wondering, is there a problem with composting citrus and then also mostly oak leaves? Would either of those lead to too much acidity?
I think I prefer oak leaves. Oak leaves, if you compared oak leaves to pine needles, oak leaves aren't going to be quite as acidic. And remember, composting, it's like this kind of, it's not magic, right? We're scientists here, but these microbes, the way that they break the stuff down, it all tends to work out for a good pH in the end. With the citrus peels, and what I'll say, Molly, is like, as long as you have a diverse mix of inputs, you're probably going to be fine. Now, if you're like a lot of folks and you have those Meyer lemons where you can't get rid of them all, like you have so many Meyer lemons and you're just going to load up your compost bin with citrus, that might not be the best thing. But honestly, I think even at the end, if you're mixing it with good amount of carbon materials and the microbes are breaking it down well, I think even in the end, that will kind of, smoothen out.
Yeah, citrus peels, if you had nothing but citrus, it wouldn't be the absolute best, that you could have for composting. But even that, all of those different citrus acids and things are going to break down. With vermicomposting, they prefer no citrus. So I definitely divert all of my citrus peels and that kind of thing to my outdoor compost with no problem. It'll break down.
A couple questions here about people that are maybe building their own compost pile outside. So for somebody that's building their own compost pile with, fence-like material or those crates, is there a specific method for turning the pile that you guys would recommend?
Yes. So if you're going to use like those pallets, you'll start with 3 of them put together, and you can put them together with, nails, screws. I often use like almost like electric fence wire to just kind of bind them together very quickly. As you're building it, eventually the stuff's going to start falling out the one side. So you'll put your 4th, side up and continue to build it to the top. Then once you are ready to flip, what you'll do is you'll unbind that, that one door, I guess, the one side of the square, you'll get it out of the way. And get yourself a good pitchfork, and not a pitchfork with a lot of the little tines. If you look at the store, they have pitchforks with different numbers of tines. You don't want that one that's really fine, because it's going to get clogged up and everything, and you're going to be cursing. So get one with like 5 tine pitchforks. And what you want to do is you want to get the outer material first, and get that in the bottom of the new pile that you're flipping into, right? So you're going to have an empty bin next to you. You're going to go along the edges and get that stuff right into the kind of the center of that new pile, so that those materials are then kind of right in the middle and get subjected to all those microbes and that heat. And then it's just a matter of, strength and just, moving it over. It's naturally going to kind of all mix up, right? So as you're dumping into the next bin, every now and again, kind of level it off with your pitchfork and just, make sure that you'll probably still see some of those lasagna layers kind of dense together. So when you're flipping, try to just really mix those up well, so that the microbes have lots of surface area to work with.
Cool. Thank you, guys. We have a question here. Does composting ever produce methane like a landfill?
Yeah, that's another real important reason to try to get your carbon and nitrogen ratio, as good as you can get, so that's the ideal, environment for the microorganisms that you're targeting. That's all those microorganisms, they take the water, they take the air. If they have the right mixture of ingredients, then they're going to be, turning it over and making it more stable. And so if you have, a lot of heavy, rich nitrogen materials and you're allowing all of that to kind of volatilize into the atmosphere, then, you're not really capturing all those materials. And so that goes to the importance of trying to do the compost process the best you can in order to basically trap all of that nitrogen within the soil or within the compost that you'll add to your soil.
Cool. And could you guys maybe expand on why meat scraps are not typically accepted in compost, but say fish waste is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, part of that is we tell homeowners that are potentially composting in their backyard to stay away from the meat products. And we really even stay away from the fish waste products, because if that pile is not getting hot enough, again, you will have smells, odors, and potentially attracting things. So large commercial composting operations, large farms, they will, their temperatures are getting hot enough to where they're not worried about some of those pathogens. Maybe again, they're in like a rural setting, they're not really worried about a couple raccoons or mice digging through the compost pile. So, and you guys may not want to know this, but, livestock operations, poultry farms, they're dead animals, they're cold animals. They usually have, large compost tumblers where you can put basically a whole cow that has died for some reason into these big tumblers, and they will compost them. And it can be done, but for like these backyard systems, we just tend to keep people away from adding those, again, because of the heat issue and potentially, having pathogens stick around.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. I guess a bit of a follow-up there. If there's somebody that has a compost or garden soil that they want to get tested, for anything, is there a local place that you guys are aware of or a process there that they could go through?
You want to answer that one, Mark?
You got it, Miles.
Well, yeah. So you can get a soil test and get your phosphorus and your potassium and your pH tested for your soil. And then if you just pay a little extra, it's through the University of Florida, you can get more of your organic matter content and those kind of things tested. So you can do that through the IFAS extension soil laboratory. And so we have the kits and we have the forms, and you'll see all the different types of materials that you can test for and the prices, if it's an extra charge for a few things here or there. But yeah, you can come to our office and pick up those bags and those forms.
Yeah, I will say that our soil testing, however, is kind of looking for soil, right? It's considering those nutrients amongst sand, silt, and clay, and in Florida, mostly sand. And so sometimes the results come back a little bit weird, especially with like pH. And that's where when I see a strange pH number and I'm helping someone interpret a soil test result, if it's sometimes it comes in around 7.5, and they're kind of concerned because we want them around 6.5. And I tell them, look, if it's compost, it's always going to have a little bit of a weird pH result, and to not freak out basically if it comes back with a little bit higher pH. And then at that point, you want to really be looking at the plants, right? Are the plants giving you any any ideas that there's something wrong, right? Are there symptoms in the plant's leaves, not fruiting properly, something like that, that would indicate some other kind of problem going on?
Cool. Thanks, guys. So you guys talked a lot about layering and the importance of layering. Is that something that if somebody has a tumbling compost, do they have to worry about layering there? And if so, what does that look like?
So, I mean, that is just more about just getting both types of materials into the compost. But yeah, by doing the tumbling action, that is going to really help you mix those materials together. So really the purpose of the layering is just a way to get it, as maybe your first go at getting the temperature high. But you are going to want to mix that together and turn it in order to get the temperature back up, once it plateaus. So yeah, for tumblers, as long as you're trying to add a little bit of both types of materials, and then you're turning it, then you'll be even better off because it's tumbling it for you.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I had some tumblers. They actually, I had them for several years, and they've started to now disintegrate. But the tumblers, basically when you add something to it, like Molly said, you just want to give a little bit of green, and you want to just put a quick layer of brown over top, so that that you're kind of pairing those browns and greens together. So that you have the ratio right.
Cool. And somebody also has had experience with a rotating drum bin like that, where they find that it stays too wet. Would the suggestion that be there just to add more browns? And is there anything to worry about, with getting weeds in the compost, or what's the best method there?
Yeah, I don't know if it would depend on, I would want to ask more questions of like how much. Were they adding just nitrogen rich products?
Right.
How much leaves were they adding? You almost want to think about, and the question came up about like, is that ratio like volume or weight? And it's really based on volume. But the thing is then it's hard sometimes to grasp the volume of leaves kind of together, or, put together versus, kind of dense vegetable scraps. So usually what you're going to be doing is adding quite a bit more leaves for the kind of the same
it's less dense, there's just
yeah, it's less dense, so you're going to be usually putting more weed or leaves sorry, than food scraps. So that would be my first question, I think, Molly, is how much browns are they adding? Is it open to rainwater? Are they adding a lot of water to it?
Sounds like not enough browns to me.
Yeah, and the one way to fix that definitely would be to add more browns, and sometimes check and make sure that it's draining properly. Maybe there's a drain hole, or maybe you need to add a drain hole or something like that.
Right, because you do want aeration. That's real important. So hopefully the tumbler has a way to let air in. But yeah, I would say definitely add more browns and see if that helps.
Cool. Great. Thank you, guys. Two more questions here about tumblers. Somebody was told that they should add topsoil to their tumbler with all their greens. Is that acceptable, or should they avoid that?
The one thing you don't need to get is compost starter, okay? Because there you will see people sell compost starters. Don't worry about that. It's going to gross you out, but these microbes are all around us. They're probably on our skin. They're going through the air. We're probably breathing them in sometimes, but that's natural. That's how it's supposed to be. So throwing some topsoil in there, it may like inoculate them with some microbes, but probably not necessary. One thing I did when I had the fish waste is I actually used finished compost, or you could use soil almost as like a smell buffer on the very top of that pile, just to kind of loosen or, kind of catch some of that, almost like a charcoal filter on the top of the bin. But otherwise, Molly, I can't think of a reason you need to add any topsoil.
Yeah, I mean, that just takes me right to vermicomposting, because when you vermicompost, you do want to add like a handful of soil to your bin, because that's going to give them the grit. It's going to help digest their food. And the worm has a gizzard, it needs that grit like a bird to crush it up. So I don't know if that was maybe what they were thinking, but you would, like Mark said, microorganisms are everywhere. They will come. You're putting all these materials in that they love. So there shouldn't really be any need to have to add a starter or a soil mix.
Even in those tumblers, you might think, well, how does it get in there? Well, you're putting rotten food, or like food that's going bad, and leaves, right? And so there's all sorts of stuff on those materials that you're putting in there. That's gonna it's all gonna be there.
Last question here about tumblers. For somebody maybe that isn't able to or doesn't regularly turn their compost, would you say it's more important for them to get a tumbler maybe that makes that process easier? Or would they be fine, just having a pile that they're not turning either ever or not frequently?
Oh, they don't want to turn? Is that the,
Yeah, yeah.
Like a
yeah,
cold
if you don't
bin.
want to turn it, I'd say get a tumbler
Yeah.
because they make it really easy. Otherwise, you're going to be just thinking of like cold bin composting, which isn't terrible because again, that food waste isn't going to the landfill. But if you want to get some good compost, but you don't want to flip stuff or turn stuff, yeah, get yourself a tumbler.
Cool.
There's a question here in the side about how do you keep roots from the shrubs at a compost bin. Ideally you would situate a compost bin kind of away from large trees because that can be an issue. Because those roots are going to want to find that rich material, right? So,
Some sort of maybe a platform or something might help. I see that they also mentioned the earthworms, and if you have worms in your compost pile, it's not a bad thing, but it really does mean that your compost pile isn't getting hot enough, because once you're getting up to like 130 degrees, the worms are going to vacate. So if your compost pile isn't getting hot enough, then those worms are going to be helping to do a more of a vermicompost type decomposition process. So I wouldn't worry about worrying about excluding the worms. I think that's any way that you can help get like a platform to help you turn that compost is going to be fine.
a tumbler would
And
be
honestly,
good.
even if you wanted the worms, they'll still make it up in there. People will have worms that end up in their tumblers a lot of times, and
Yeah.
put that in there, but they did.
I mean, a couple of layers of cardboard might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
Where can you purchase the tumblers and how much, Dana? I think some of our local garden centers sell these. I know some of the big box stores even might sell them, maybe through their online stores. But Molly will tell you go on Amazon or something like that. She's a big online shopper, right? And you'll find them there,
Oh,
right,
yeah.
Molly?
Thanks, Mark.
Aren't you?
I mean, it's a place to access them. You'll have to probably either way, you're going to have to put it together. But yeah, I mean, if you go to a big box store, you might not have a lot of variety. You kind of have to get what they have. And then, shopping online, you can find a lot more variety, but you probably will have to put it together.
Cool. We got
How
about
much? Oh, sorry.
go ahead,
Price
Mark.
wise, you depending on
Price.
everything, maybe $100, something like
At
that,
least.
somewhere around there.
If you want like a bigger one or a multi-chambered one, you're gonna have to put in the money because I've looked, they're pretty expensive, especially for the multiple chambers, and the bigger bulk.
Cool. So we have about 10 more minutes here and 9 more questions. So I'm just going to go down the list. So these won't necessarily be related to one another, but we'll see if we can get through all of these. So Elijah asks, are waxy materials generally compostable? Should one be worried about getting microplastics in it?
You're gonna have a really hard time composting those materials at a backyard compost. I know when we had a little festival in my neighborhood here, my next door neighbor offered to compost those materials, and they used those, recyclable cups and that kind of thing, which was great that they were, or those are compostable cups, but that they were technically compostable, but really they were only compostable in like a commercial type facility. So any of those types of waxy materials are going to take a really long time to break down in a backyard compost. And yeah, depending on whatever they're made out of, it might not be the best thing to put into your compost. So I'd try to stick to, more of the paper towels,
Yeah,
just regular.
I'd probably avoid them, quite honestly, Elijah.
Mhm.
And then I was wondering if you guys could maybe explain a little bit or clarify kind of greens versus browns. We have a question here. Do you need to have all your greens for a pile before you can start? Maybe it's just expanding on those two.
So maybe I'll explain, you saw my pickup truck load. It took me usually about 3 to 4 weeks of collecting to build up that pallet square all the way to the top. So you don't have to have them all at once to build that square, that cubic yard of bulk, but it should be pretty close together, right? You don't want to wait months before you add a next one. So, no, you don't have to have them all at once, but it should be a pretty short range of time that you kind of get that bulk up. That's what I got. What you got, Molly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one of the big things. I think when we'll do these workshops in person and take everybody out back and just show them us building one layer. And it really starts to get the idea of like really how much bulk you need to really get a hot compost to up to 140 degrees. That's not to say that you can't get at least to like 120, even 130 degrees with a smaller bulk. It's just going to take a lot more attention, flipping, adding water to really get that compost, killing the weed seeds, killing the different potential pathogens. And so, yeah, it can be kind of a challenge. I think that's where some cold bin composting and making sure that you're covering the nitrogen materials with carbon materials and just taking your shovel and flipping it, after you do that each time is going to really kind of help to use your greens a little more wisely in a smaller system.
Great. And Molly, you quickly mentioned the cold composting. If somebody does do the cold bin composting and isn't checking, the temperature, how do they know when it's done or ready?
I mean, it's going to take more time, and you're really going to start to see no recognizable pieces. It should really start to look like a finished compost, and it will take a lot more time. Honestly, it's the less effort you put in, the less gain you're going to get out. So I think if your main goal is to keep food out of the landfill, I definitely go that direction. And just try to make sure that you are covering your nitrogen materials with a carbon material. So maybe get some buckets of the mulch, from the Appalachian Parkway, and have that next to your setup. And so you can have something that for sure you have that you can cover if you don't have a lot of leaves in your yard. So yeah, I mean it can be a challenge.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Mana is looking for some tips. As you guys mentioned, sometimes fire ants get in those earth machine bins. What's the best method for getting rid of them? Would just adding water for a few days and turning the compost do the trick?
So again, keeping the pile moist typically helps with fire ants. Now, fire ants are a major pain. They're just like weeds. We're likely never going to get rid of them. And so something that you can also use that is safe for vegetable gardens and would be considered safe around your compost pile is a product called spinosad. That's actually the kind of the chemical name. It's actually a natural bacterium. The common brand name that you can find in local garden centers would be, it's called Come and Get It. And so that's a kind of, or a natural organic ant control that works pretty good. And it's going to work similar to an Amdro type product if you ever use one of those, where you're going to sprinkle a little bit, it's baited, the ants take it back to the queen and the queen goes away and boom, there goes the pile. But, you're never going to get rid of fire ants. So just, it's kind of like a whack-a-mole type of thing. Just know that Amdro is not labeled for use in and around your vegetable garden. It's more for the lawn and stuff like that.
Thanks for that knowledge, Mark. Quick question here from Dan. Dan is wondering, is Epsom salt a good additive for compost piles given its hydrated magnesium sulfate properties?
What you got, Molly?
I mean, I wouldn't think that you would need to add anything like that to your pile.
I wouldn't say Epsom salts can be helpful for, magnesium, calcium. But I would, say you got tomatoes with blossom end rot or something, that might be where, now, maybe next time you should add a little bit of Epsom salts. But, the microbes know what to do. If you give them the right mix of ingredients, they'll take over.
A couple very specific questions here. One, Judy is wondering, when putting in a tea bag, do you need to worry about removing the string and the paper tag, or are those good to go with it?
I wouldn't worry about the string or the paper tag, but oftentimes the newer tea bags are made with synthetic materials, and sometimes they won't break down. So in that case, if it rips easily, it might be paper. If it kind of like takes a lot of work, that's probably something like a synthetic type of material. And in that case, I mean, unless you want to cut the synthetic thing open and kind of pour it in your compost bin, you can do that. Otherwise, I would just, unfortunately, gonna have to go in the trash.
Cool, thanks. And what about if somebody was looking to compost a bunch of pears? Would you recommend that, or anything they should be concerned of?
Well, first eat them, right? As many as you can.
Yeah,
But yeah,
compost
that's
away.
fine.
That'd be great. That's a great nitrogen source.
Cool. And if somebody's burying their food scraps in their backyard, should they also be tossing leaves into that hole too? Or could you share a little bit more about, the whole composting?
Yeah, so that's kind of like the kind of the burial method
Trench, yeah.
of doing it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. You can't, it's gonna be a lot longer process doing it that way, no matter what. But yeah, putting leaves in there would be fine. Just kind of doing like a layered system and then putting
Yeah,
soil on top.
I don't think it'll hurt. I don't know how much it'll help, but what's going to happen is the microbes, right? There's carbon in the soil already. There's a good amount of carbon in the soil. So the microbes they'll kind of munch on that stuff in a way to where there's always this balance of carbon with the amount of nitrogen that's there, I think. So they'll kind of regulate themselves depending on how much. So if you add a little bit more, maybe that'll help them go through it quicker. The other thing too is the finer this stuff is chopped up, that's going to make the process go quicker as well, because you're making that surface area much larger actually when you make the pieces smaller. And so the microbes will be able to munch on that stuff a lot quicker.
Sweet, thanks guys. We have 3 minutes left and we have got 3 questions, so perfect timing. And thanks to both you guys and all the participants for sticking around for this Q&A. So Kathy is wondering, can you guys recommend anyone locally to install raised beds?
I don't think so. So one thing we don't do is typically recommend specific businesses. So what I would recommend, we do raised bed gardening 101, and we can, go over how you can do it yourself. They make it real easy nowadays because you can go to the big box store. You can buy 3 2x10 by 8 pieces of lumber. They're going to cut one of them in half. You put those in your car, so make sure you can fit an 8-foot piece of lumber in your car. And they sell these handy little blocks over in the patio section that these boards fall right into. And so in that case, there's no having to screw or nail things together. But I think the person you want to call up is more like a handyman or carpenter that could just do some woodwork right quick for you.
I would say if it is like a community garden, then you could look into the Mayan Garden Project, because they do help do garden installs for a community type garden setting.
Yeah, I was going to say that the community garden grant through Tobias's group here, that could help you maybe
and help get the materials. That's for sure.
get the
for a
materials.
community garden,
But again,
not just a
look
garden.
in the outdoor patio section of Home Depot, Lowe's type of place. They sell these cement blocks that have slots in them where these 2-inch boards slide right into it.
Great. Well, I'm going to do a quick plug there then for that community garden grant program, and then segue into how people get more resources for you. So for anybody that's not aware, Leon County has a community garden grant program where you can apply to either start or expand an existing community garden. You can get up to $1,000 grant to start that. The process is fairly easy. You get to see Molly and I as we come check out the site. Molly shares all the expertise. I'm the one that stands there pretending like I know what I'm talking about.
He's money bags. Yeah, he's money bags.
Nodding and smiling. So that's available. It's as a first come first serve basis. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find that information on our site and encourage you guys to apply. Cool. Last question for you guys. Mark, you mentioned that you guys have some additional courses about building raised garden beds, other things like that. If somebody's looking to participate in another one of your presentations or the worm composting presentation, how do they, or where do they go to get that information, and what can they do?
Yeah, so I was going to say we do have on our Eventbrite vermicompost workshops that pop up, so through our Eventbrite page, but also I've been partnering with Sarasota County in the virtual setting to do vermicompost workshops, and we do have one planned. I want to say it's June 30th, but we don't have it quite yet on our on the Sarasota Eventbrite page. So we have that one coming up. And then go ahead, Mark. What was
I was just going to say that our Eventbrite page is the best place to look out for upcoming programs from your local county extension office. So if you just do Leon County Extension Eventbrite, we have kind of like a home page there on Eventbrite where we post our upcoming programs. And that's where you, on that Eventbrite page, you can actually follow us. So you'll put in your email, and when we put up new programs, they will send you an email saying, hey, the Leon County Extension Office is having this happening. And it's great because all of our program areas at the Extension Office put their information up there. So it could be 4-H programs, it could be food prep, budgeting, you know, from family consumer science agents. It could be anything plant related from Molly, myself, or Trevor, who works with us. So that's probably the best place. Another one is, you know, like us on Facebook. I think we're on Instagram and Twitter and all those social media places. You know, go look for us there. Leon IFAS Extension, Leon County, you know, Leon Extension. You'll find us somewhere out there on the web.
And if you're interested in attending that, I think it's June 30th event, go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'll make sure that to get you the materials that you need to sign up when we get it posted on the Eventbrite. So mjameson@ufl.edu.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark and Molly, for doing this. We're right at 8 p.m. So we want to be respectful of both your guys' time and the attendees. So we're just going to, thank you guys for attending. Hope to see you guys in future summit sessions. Again, we have 2 more tomorrow and then 2 more on Friday. I'll put up a slide here with that information. Let's see here. Perfect. So with that, thank you guys all for coming. Big round of applause, and thanks to Mark and Molly again for their expertise and help with all this valuable information. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us, y'all. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for the invitation, Tobias.
Oh, yeah.
See y'all.